I'd like everybody to, just for a moment, to stand up. If you're close to somebody, hold their hand. Our really wonderful word in Coast Salish is nutsamot. When I was here last year, I've thought much about what was going to happen out of that moment. What we're doing as a collective is creating a new way for our relatives to not only be free of pain, but be free from the pressures and the stress that's on them by society. We need to help. The only way we can help, the only way I can help, is to lend my support to this gentleman, spiritual support. I don't know if he thinks about me ever or remembers me. For me, that's okay, because what I'm doing is on a spiritual level, sending him positive energy, sending those who work with him positive energy so they can achieve a beautiful goal, a goal that's going to help our relatives. We're all affected. We're all affected by substance abuse in our families, whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, any number of pharmaceuticals. We need to come to a place of something organic that's going to help us, because substance is synthetic. Synthetics aren't good for us, aren't good for our bodies to begin with, but not good for us in general. So I'm here to say I'm nutsamot squallowing with this gentleman, one heart and one mind with him. Cannabis slachens. Oh, my friends and relatives, I'm saying in the chant, first, that the Snowiath, that's the closest word I can get to research. Snowiath in my language means teachings or knowledge. So I'm saying that cannabis is a medicine, that Snowiath that they're gathering, that knowledge that they're gathering around medicine, cannabis medicine, that's strong, and that it helps all of us. I'm also saying that the infinite come and be with us. Come and be with us to open our hearts and our minds to the Snowiath, to the teachings, to the knowledge that's coming here. Asking that our hearts are open and our minds are open to what it is we're going to hear, because what we're going to hear is very important, because it's going to help our relatives. So I welcome you all here this morning on behalf of all of the children from Musqueam, their families, and their elected leadership as well. I'm saying thank you to all of you on behalf of those who are hurt, those who are in pain. I'm saying thank you to you already, because the knowledge that you're bringing is important to them. The knowledge is for them to heal and to feel comfort and have peace of mind. So thank you. Enjoy the day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shane. Shane is a knowledge keeper at the Musqueam First Nation, and I thank him for his words and his support. A year ago with Shane, we gathered here to launch the Cannabis Science Professorship at UBC, and the words that he shared then and the words that he shared now continues to be an inspiration to me and a support to me in my work and the work of my team and my colleagues at the BC Centre on Substance Use. My name is MJ Malloy. I am the Canopy Growth Professor of Cannabis Science. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today to the 2019 Cannabis Science Symposium, an event brought to you by University of British Columbia and the BC Centre on Substance Use and supported by our friends at Canopy Growth and Spectrum Therapeutics. Before we get down to the program today and before I begin to welcome the speakers and the panelists and the moderators, I do want to take care of some housekeeping. We will have some breaks. At the end of the second session, we will, and I invite you to join us for lunch at the end of the day, in which we can share some food and we can have some conversations. We will be hoping for some audience participation and some questions, and we'll have a microphone to distribute in the audience. This day is being recorded and broadcast, so I'd like to say hello as well to our friends online. And we will circulate the link afterwards so people can see any sessions that they missed or catch anything they'd like to see again. Please feel free to bring in food and drink or to use the facilities at any time during the session. This is an ambitious schedule we have for us this morning, and so please make yourself at home and make yourself comfortable. If there's anything we can do to support you, please see me or please see Kevin Hollett, who will be in the front here keeping us to time. Before I get down to our first speaker, though, I do want to recognize that we are gathering today on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I would like to begin this morning, if I may, asking us all to engage in some silent reflection, to remember those of our friends and our family, our relatives, who we've lost to the drug war and we've lost to the overdose crisis. Thank you. It's now my great honor to bring to the stage our first speaker, Dr. Mark Ware, who's been a tremendous supporter of me and our work here at the BCCSU and at UBC. Dr. Ware, we're very fortunate that he's joining us today. He has a very busy schedule. He's made several signal contributions to cannabis science, to pain research, to drug policy, and to public health in Canada. He is the Chief Medical Officer of the Canopy Growth Corporation. He took a leave of absence as an associate professor in family medicine and anesthesia at McGill University in July 2018 to begin work in this capacity. He began studying cannabis and pain at McGill in 1999, and in the 2000s he secured grants from CIHR to study the safety and efficacy of cannabis for pain. And in the process of doing that, made some landmark contributions to our understanding of cannabis for pain relief. He was Director of Clinical Research of the Allen Edwards Pain Management Union at the McGill University Health Centre for over 10 years and was the Executive Director of the Canadian Consortium for the Investigation of Cannabinoids since 2007. He has advised the Canadian federal government on cannabis policy since 2001, and in 2016 he served as the Vice Chair of the Federal Task Force on the Legalization and Regulation of Cannabis in Canada. Please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Ware.
Thank you. Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde, toutes et tous. Thank you. It's always worrying when the intro bio is longer than the remarks that you're actually going to make. But thank you, MJ, for those kind words. So my job really here is to reflect a little bit on the last year from our support for MJ and for the Cannabis Science Professorship. By way of metrics, it's sometimes useful to look back and see, well, what have we achieved by this through this support? And I did a quick review of Medline, and I looked at MJ's publications, and he has published 33 papers in the last 11 months, so since January 2019. 33 papers, that's about 3 a month, and for any of you who publish or who are in academia, that's an incredibly prolific output. 12 of those were as senior author. So I think when I put on my corporate hat and I think of return on investment, that's an amazing output, MJ. Congratulations. Some of those papers, one as late as last week, are changing and transforming the way we think about the use of cannabis, the way we're managing harm reduction processes and programs. So congratulations for that. But I also recognize that behind MJ is an enormous team of people. These publications don't happen without the work of students, without the work of support and associates, without the work of colleagues and collaborators, and some of whom I've met this morning call MJ a friend, and I think that's probably a major reason how you're able to be so successful, is you bring not just knowledge, but friendship and collaboration to the work that you do. So I think that's also a value that we seek to support. And finally, just the fact that bringing us together a year later, see where the world has come. We know that there are still challenges. There was a piece in the Ottawa Citizen this weekend that said very crudely, the bodies are still piling up. So we have a lot of work left to do. But what I cannot do is sit by and watch and not do anything. I think it's implicit in all of us to ask ourselves, what were you doing while this was happening? Canopy Growth is pleased to have supported MJ. This is one thing that we can do is wind him up, let him go, and let's make this thing happen. And I will close just by a simple reflection, and I think it's consistent with what we've heard from both MJ and from our elder. A poem by Robert Frost called Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, and it concludes with the lines, "But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep." Thank you, MJ, and good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Mark, for those words. Consider myself wound up, and certainly very proud to be working with a great team at the BC Centre on Substance Use to do the work that we want to do and the work that we've been entrusted to do on behalf of our participants. And today, as a part of that, we feel very strongly at the BC Centre on Substance Use about the importance of working with community, about the importance of working with people who use drugs, and supporting them in all we can in their health and well-being. And we're very fortunate to be joined today as well by our keynote speaker, who's one of the world's preeminent researchers in the health and well-being of people who inject drugs. and has made tremendous contributions to harm reduction in Los Angeles and the United States and around the world. Dr. Ricky Bluthenthal holds a PhD, and he's the Associate Dean for Social Justice and a professor in the Department of Preventative Medicine at the in the Institute for Prevention Research at the Keck School of Medicine in the University of Southern California. His research has established the effectiveness of syringe exchange programs, tested novel interventions to reduce HIV risk and improve HIV testing among people who inject drugs and men who have sex with men. His research has documented how community conditions contribute to health disparities and examined health policy implementation. At present, Dr. Bluthenthal is conducting studies on preventing the initiation of injection drug use and examining substitution of cannabis for opioids among people who inject. Other research interests include HIV prevention and health promotion for gay and bisexual men, drug use epidemiology, life course theory, and mixed message research designs. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Bluthenthal with us today, and so please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning, everybody. I feel a little bit like Obama receiving the Nobel Prize. It's a little premature in the cannabis world. I'm not sure I've done anything yet, but thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. Everything I've learned about public health over the years, I learned in 1992 when I ran a needle exchange program, or helped start one in Oakland, California. And I just want to begin with a little bit of a reflection on how important what you all have done in Vancouver has been to the rest of us. You know, you've been not only fellow travelers, but really leaders in the response. And as grim as the death toll has been, both in Vancouver and Canada, and of course in the United States, the rest of us look to you for your innovation, your science, and your engagement in community. And in particular, I want to highlight something that MJ referred to, which is a crucial role that the Canadian drug-using organizations have used in driving that research agenda, coming up with responses that are effective for dealing with the population's health. And I'd like to think that in my old age, since I've been doing this a while, I'm actually getting old, is that what I'm learning every day or relearning is the crucial importance of putting the people who have the problem at the center of the solution, which is something we don't do in the United States, but that we will continue to try to do, and that I think you guys have really led the way. So let me just start with thanking you for that. Today I'm going to talk about, well, let me talk about myself first, sorry. So I am new to cannabis research. I haven't spent a lot of time working on it except in the last 3 or 4 years, so I really feel like I'm learning. The good news is I don't really have any strong opinions necessarily yet, so I'm an open book. But I am worried about something, and I'll develop this in the talk as I go along, which is that I've been around through the HIV epidemic and the hepatitis C epidemic and the overdose death epidemic and the emerging hepatitis C new epidemic and infective endocarditis and national epidemics of skin and soft tissue infections, to know that, you know, we're not going to find the solution both in any one thing or by having a narrow focus on even methods, right? So the truth is the answer is in supporting the populations that have these challenges, and we really need to work to have our research more aligned with the authentic interests of the populations that are undergoing these repeated epidemics. So that's sort of going to lead with the lead, and then I'll go back and explain why I feel that way. All right, so I'll talk a litof bit about, and most of the people in the room will know this, the rationale for why cannabis and opiates look like a promising thing to explore, and then talk about some approaches that we use in prevention that are kind of moving us away, I think, in a good way, from more rigorous, I'm funny saying this, more rigorous experimental designs, which is sort of the gold standard, and towards, you know, almost contingent understanding of the way that things might actually operate in the real world. And I think that's important, in part because as someone who's spent most of his adult life in medical schools, what you realize when you look at medical practice is that physicians don't do evidence-based medicine. They do practice that takes into account evidence. So you can have a situation where someone has a urological problem, and there's an indication for a particular drug, but that doesn't work. And so the physician will often go and say, well, this other thing might work for that, so let's try that on you and see what happens. And I think that's sort of where we need to work towards. It's sort of, the fancy way of saying that now is personalized medicine, but to sort of not handcuff ourselves by being overly focused on, hey, we did this trial and it turned out that way, particularly because the issues that we're dealing with are things that we don't, understand that well. I mean, pain, right? There's no objective measure of pain. As someone who's studied drug use, almost 30 years at this point, I mean, I hear people use the term addiction a lot. I'm not convinced I even know what that is. Like, I know people use things a lot, and I know sometimes bad things happen from that. But I have a feeling that for each of us, what that pattern of behavior and consequences is different. And so, we want to be, I think, more engaged in an understanding of what's happening with the individual in the context of their life, and not just sort of caught up in what a particular type of science might be saying about something. And then I'll talk about the implications of that for study design, and then get back to my point about the structural limitations of all of this stuff. All right. So one of the things that happens when we commercialize something, and we're seeing this in a variety of areas, is you get product diversification. So you're seeing this like with the e-cigarette stuff. In my department, we have a very large tobacco research center, a lot of focus on how the evolving marketplace for e-cigarettes has public health implications. And, I'll just highlight this real quickly. I mean, it's important to realize e-cigs have been around a long time, but it really wasn't until Juul that they hit the sweet spot. So Juul is when you had the big uptake and use. And so I imagine the same thing will happen in the cannabis environment. I mean, we've had cannabis around for a long time. We already know there are different ways to administer it, to use it, different ways to refine it and make it available for consumption. That's going to continue to evolve, and we're going to need to track that, because the truth is some new thing will happen and it'll be, the crack of cocaine. And then we'll have a whole different, maybe in a good way, a whole different sort of set of public health challenges or benefits potentially. There are also changes in where it can be used. And so, we're going to have to keep our eye on the ball. All right, so the rationale, there's been great research. Felipe Lucas has done a lot of work, but others, and there's more recent stuff that's come out, that really basically suggests what I've already highlighted, which is that for some patients, using cannabis helps, right? It helps with pain. It helps with them managing their opiate use. And that's sort of been shown over and over and over again. This is some data from a paper we published in 2015. And what it basically simply shows is that if you use marijuana, it looked like your frequency of opiate use was lower than if you didn't use marijuana. And this is in a sample of people who inject drugs. Now, why does that matter? Well, there are a whole ton of health risks, and I've sort of already highlighted them, that come with injection drug use as opposed to non-injection drug use. So that's your infective endocarditis risk go up, skin abscesses go up, HIV, hepatitis C, hepatitis B. It's a very risky way of using drugs. So if cannabis is a reasonable substitute for that, I don't think any of us would really object to having more cannabis use in this particular population in particular. So it's pretty exciting in my world where we don't have great solutions for the problems that folks confront. This is data from a colleague of mine who's the PI with me on the current study we're looking at with cannabis and opiates. And this is data from Denver, Colorado in 2014. And basically what it shows is that as people's frequency of injection use went down with more cannabis use over time. And Colorado is important because it's a state that also has legal recreational cannabis. So just like California, and in particular Los Angeles, there's a real opportunity to sort of make these products available to populations who might benefit from them most. The other thing I want to point out, this is a qualitative study that some colleagues of mine did at RTI, looking at low-frequency heroin users. And what you're basically seeing here, and you can't read it because well, maybe you could read it. Anyway, read it at your leisure. I guess we'll make the slides available. But the point is that these are reports from individuals who've used heroin for a long time, but at a low level, and the utility of using cannabis in relation to that to sort of make that possible. And over long periods of time. So one of the interviews was sort of an 8-year time period of slowly substituting cannabis for their opiate use. And I think this is interesting. I mean, the possibilities here are real. And again, this is why it's sort of this trying to open the box on the science becomes important, because there's not one path, right? We're not going to find strong mechanical, biological relationships between I give you this amount of, I give you a gram of cannabis, and so you're going to do one less balloon of heroin. Like, that's probably not going to happen. So we have to be open to a sort of wider variety of approaches to people managing their drug use. All right, so then the other piece and this has been in the national papers, is the sort of ecological findings, particularly related to medical marijuana, states with legal medical marijuana. So you've got these findings from national studies showing opiate-related overdose deaths going down, reductions in hospitalization, traffic fatalities, and opiate prescribing. Now, there is a caveat to that I just want to highlight, which is the Austin paper, and it applies actually I think it only applies to this one. But essentially, the CMS, which collects the Medicaid data, which is what they use for this analysis, changed their rules for coding substance abuse-related incidents. And so there was a national drop in substance abuse incidents that was obviously artificial. So some of this is, maybe not as on strong a footing as it used to be. Lucas, again, has made this point about the mechanisms by which cannabis use might reduce overdose deaths and overdoses. So you obviously have reductions in opiate use. You can get reductions in injection drug use. We see that in Denver. And then a thing I'm interested in particular, which has been less studied, is withdrawal symptoms. So I was surprised to discover, like 4 years ago, that there's never actually been a community-based study of opiate withdrawal symptoms among people who use opiates. That's kind of weird. And so we did it. It's under review now, but it's highly prevalent. It's the biggest problem medical problem that this population faces. And so let me just highlight that a bit, because I think one of the things I want to emphasize to you is again, that importance of having the agenda driven by the people, not by the researchers, right? So I've already told you I was there at the beginning of the HIV epidemic, right? We've seen the hepatitis C stuff. We're seeing the overdose death stuff. And what we do in science is we try to find our little lever or magic bullet. It could be needle exchange. It could be safe consumption sites. It could be naloxone distribution. And all of those things help and are important. But they're often not sufficient. And so we really do have to reorient our thinking towards what's going on for people. So the fact that we haven't actually done a study about opiate withdrawal until 21 years into my career, like that, there's a moment of self-reflection there of like, well, what have you been doing? And so, my general call is that we really do have to, realize we have to do, and they're not games. I mean, we're scientists. There's a role that we play, but we have to be more sensitive to what's going on to the populations that we hope to help, and have our research better aligned with their actual needs, so that we're not having a conversation 15 years from now about something that we all knew was a problem but never studied. So just keep that in mind, and that's really sort of what's motivating me in a lot of this work. So this is, there he is, the Hulk Hogan of publications. That when I was a kid, that was a more positive connotation. So sorry about that. This is the 1991 version of him. So this study just came out last week, suggesting that there's some benefits here around pain management using cannabis. And then, of course, you have the meta-analysis that came out in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, sort of saying it doesn't help, right? So we're going to get these kinds of reports back and forth based on methodologies. And, you know, I think I can safely say in some respects, because the science is so poorly aligned with the population's actual needs, that it probably will be 10 or 15 years before we have an idea about how to reliably use cannabis to deal with pain, to deal with withdrawal symptoms, to help prevent overdose deaths. Not that we won't have been making progress and making impact, but where we say, okay, here's a study that shows that this actually works. So we have to have patience. Science operates slowly. All right, so this is some data from a study that I conducted in 2016, 2017. This is difficult to look at, but what I did is I had one of my doctoral students just look at a whole bunch of different ways of trying to figure out whether there was any association over time in a population of people who inject drugs in Los Angeles and San Francisco, such that as their cannabis use changed, their opiate use signal went one way or another. And the answer is there was no signal. So there was really no statistical relationship between these behaviors. So just put that in your back pocket for a minute. Now, another thing we're doing, and this paper has been submitted. No? Rachel? Or yes, this one has. Okay. So this is a study. That's my postdoc, Rachel Caesar over there, who worked on this paper. And what we looked at is the intention. So why are you using cannabis? And you know, it lines up pretty logically. So, you know, you have people who say, hey, I'm using it for emotional problems, and hey, they have emotional problems. And you have people saying, I'm using it to reduce my opiate use, and hey, I have really high opiate use. And also I'm using non-prescribed buprenorphine, which is an indication of treatment seeking in my worldview. And then of course this thing around management of opiate withdrawals, and you see people who are using cannabis have a lot of, are using it to deal with their withdrawal symptoms. So this is cross-sectional analysis. So we'll see what happens over time. But this is, again, very promising in terms of, even though there are wide confidence intervals. So we'll collect a larger sample. We'll deal with this again in the new study. But I think it's promising in terms of some of the ways that cannabis might be helpful to this population. And then let me just say one thing, which I haven't said also, which of course is, having ignored withdrawal symptoms for as long as we have, of course, we know from the work we have under review that it's associated with injection risk. It's associated with elevated overdose risk as well. So there may be causal pathways for cannabis to have an impact in this population. We still need to learn what those are precisely. All right. So then I have a good Twitter feed. Not because I contribute to it, I follow good people. And so I thought this was interesting. So this is two people, people know this guy, Spoon, who's in recovery, talking about opiate withdrawal and cannabis. And then this is Meg Inwood, who lives in Toronto, I believe, recently housed a person who's drugs, and talks about cannabis in exactly the opposite way. So and what she just basically says is, I found the exact opposite. Pot, when I'm with withdrawal, makes me feel worse. So, again, we can live in a world where medications have different impacts on people because we already live in that world, right? That's why there's 12 different aspirins and 16 different cold medicines. We have to be sensitive to the fact that, these are not like mechanical things. People's human biology is going to interact with these medications in different ways, and we need to be open to that when we think about the cannabis science stuff. All right, so this is just a brief description of the study we're doing now. We've begun data collection. The first aim is to look at whether cannabis changes opiate frequency, and then the next one is to look at whether it's related to non-fatal overdoses. And this is sort of how we conceptualize it, so using the drug set and setting. And I just want to emphasize that one of the things that I despair of in this research is this piece around the social economic stuff, and I'll explain why in a minute. But one of the things that's important to realize is that for many of the people in my studies who are seriously poor, the average year, on average, they've been homeless for 26 years. They are getting destroyed by our political economic system. And so the capacity of anything to have an impact on their health outcomes is mitigated by that fact. So part of what the work I hope to do in the future, probably 10 years from now, is more focused intentionally on that piece of it, because I think that that's where a lot of the problems come from. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, this fentanyl contamination, which you have all suffered through and are living through every day, also changes the calculation a bit. Just like I think the advocacy for safe supply has never made more sense now, never made more sense than it does now. Similarly, you know, in Los Angeles and San Francisco, where fentanyl has now been introduced and is slowly overtaking the heroin market in different paces. I think in San Francisco, it really has mostly taken over the heroin market. In Los Angeles, it's a little bit slower process. But that drug is really dangerous. Shorter half-life, so people will have to use it more often. Higher potency, so people overdose more frequently. It's going to tax all of our resources, whether they be syringe exchange programs or naloxone distribution. It represents an existential threat, and I don't need to tell you guys this because you've been living it, to the lives of all of our, our associates, friends, family members who are using these drugs. And so, if cannabis in any way helps that go down, that's a win, and we need to take it, right? So we don't need to like, maybe, you know, look, if there's a subpopulation that's like, for them, cannabis is the jam and it keeps them away from fentanyl, then I'm all in. And I think we need to begin thinking about it in those terms. All right, so then there are other considerations, and these are just examples that are used in HIV a lot. I like them just because what ends up happening is that you need sort of different interventions at each stage, right? So getting someone to test is different than getting someone to link to treatment, which is different to getting them to get on ART, which is different than getting them to stay on ART. So I'm all in favor of more ideas, more approaches, scaling them together, mixing and matching, because we're not solving the problem the way we do this now. And this is an example that Peter Davidson, who's at UC San Diego, developed with me and a couple other people, looking at that same kind of approach when you think about overdose. In this case, the issue was diversion of prescription pills. And you can see there are a whole variety of different things that we do. In the United States, we're always locked into, you know, if it isn't the one thing that fixes it, then we can't do it, right? And so we really do need to move away from that. So you can imagine a world where as you move forward with the cannabis, you're looking at encouragement designs, because I think motivations and intentions of users probably matter a great deal. We also have to think carefully and be imaginative about dose and route of administration. So I'll share a tobacco story. So I'm really enjoying being around a bunch of tobacco people because I didn't know anything about it before I moved to USC, so I've been learning a lot. So one of the things that comes up, so one thing we know for sure is that adult vape users, many of them have success moving away from combustible cigarettes, right? So my question was, why is that? Because there is nicotine replacement. In California, you can get nicotine replacement for free, right? You can get the gum or the patch for free. And the reason is that the dosing of the nicotine replacement therapies is at a dose to just keep you from withdrawal, right? So it doesn't soothe or satiate, but the vapes do. There's an important lesson to be learned in that. Like, if you were thinking about your nicotine replacement therapy as what makes people happy, right? What's going to stop them from why do I care if it's a higher dose, right? Like, I just don't want you on these death sticks, right? Which have 4,000 different compounds and 3,000 of them are carcinogenic, right? So we sort of have to stop, like, you know, people, patients, consumers, you know, they deserve to get products that work for them. So I think in the cannabis world, you know, we want to think about, hey, what is the dose? What is the potency? Maybe it should be higher. Maybe it should be lower. Maybe it should have more CBD, whatever. But let's be imaginative about it and not sort of think about it as, you know, they got a little bit of it and it didn't make a difference, so it doesn't work, right? So just be sensitive to that piece of it. The other thing is I think there are probably some ways of using cannabis that is sort of in the ecological momentary assessment world or just-in-time world where if you're addicted to opiates, your clock is pretty well set. So like I could imagine an approach where you find a subpopulation of people for whom a certain dose and potency of cannabis helps them with withdrawal. You know that they often have withdrawal in the afternoon, and so you make cannabis available to them in the afternoon, right? And in that moment, what you've done is you've prevented someone rushing their shot, maybe engaging in crime to be able to purchase their next dose, but more importantly, you've provided them with care, right? Which is something that we don't do for this population. And so this is I'm not good with graphics, but this is like my little attempt to sort of think about the ways that we could roll some of this stuff out. So if they don't have cannabis use at all, hey, why don't you try it, see if it works for withdrawal? No harm, no foul. It's legal, right? And you could do these other choices. The same thing with the people who are already medicinal users. Let's figure out a way to make it prevention or lead to treatment, and then I'll begin exploring with these other compounds that are in the plant. And then with the recreational use, the same thing. See if we didn't get you the right kind of cannabis, maybe if you're a recreational user, this could be a thing where you do end up substituting a high that you like for another high that you like, but one that's safer. And I do think because so many folks are dying, because we don't have a ton of toolkits to deal with the other issues as yet, we really do need to, take some chances and be more imaginative in the ways that we think about making these products available to people who might benefit from them. All right, so how much time do I have left? What time is it? 10 minutes? All right, I'm gonna try and go through this really quickly. And it's, for me, I find it very moving because I ignored it for so long. So, we have these social determinants of health. Bad things happen to poor people all the time, and it's not because poor people are bad, right? We all intuitively understand that. We do not operationalize that in our policies. So I'll take you through sort of what's happened in Los Angeles with our people who inject drugs over time. So the first thing is, I've been doing this in Los Angeles since 2001. And what we see is the homelessness has really increased in most of the neighborhoods in this population. So it was already high in our Skid Row, that's our downtown East Side version, but it even increased there. In East Los Angeles, where my office is, it's gone up, almost doubled. And then in South Los Angeles, last time we checked it went up. So we're the physical conditions that this population reside in are worse and worse and worse. And there are 100 policies that have created this outcome, right? So the people who were using drugs in East Los Angeles in 2001 are not better people than who are using in 2016, 17, right? This is housing market, drug policy laws, arrest, incarceration, food insecurity, driving this population into horrendous physical conditions. You end up with these circumstances where people are having things stolen from them on a regular basis, assaulted. The 12-month, 13% raped in the last 6 months of the women. So when you think about the casual kinds of conversations we have about what to do about the homeless, and you say, oh, they're getting their heads kicked in, right? And, my take home on all of this is that the people who have resources, like folks like me, we have to change, right? And the truth is, it's easier for us to change. We have mental resources, we have physical resources, we have psychic resources because we're not getting kicked in the head every day, right? So we have to change if we want the population to be better. It's not up to them because we've put them in a pit and we keep digging. So this is part of that same thing. Contact with police is high, arrests are high. And then the other thing, so we looked at whether, and this was just reported by Alex Krawls, one of his medical students at the APHA. This is around the shelter. So we have lots of tents in LA and San Francisco, and these are the conditions that people are living in. Most are spending most evenings in tents. They're having to move them often, and half of the moves are due to the government. And part of the things that we're trying to deal with in my neighborhood, so I live in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and we have a great group that I don't volunteer with, but I'm a fan of, that's sort of trying to be the progressive response to our homeless situation. But we've perfected in Los Angeles this politics around homelessness that ensures that the population gets brutalized. And so we have this 311 system. So people who own homes call this thousands of times a day. Then it goes to the city council office. The city council office calls the police, and the police go out and respond, right? So this is a thing that came out around stolen belongings, don't be a rat. And we're really at that point, right? And so not only do we, folks in my circumstances who are homeowners, benefit from a housing market that creates homelessness, because I do benefit from it, right? My wife and I bought a house 19 years ago. It's tripled in value, right? That's why we have homelessness now. So we both benefit on the back end and then on the front end, because we're calling the police to respond to these people all the time. And again, that's why I say we have to change, right? Folks are homeless not because of their choices. It's because of the system that we've set up that we benefit from. And if the people who are benefited from it can't find the compassion and empathy in their heart to change the way they move forward, we're never going to get out of this problem. All right, then let me just go through this quickly. This is the stuff, and I think most of us have adopted this now, around trying to take the stigma out of our language, using person-centered language. You know, it's astonishingly important. As an African-American man, I'm aware of that. It's no different for homeless people, right? So we've got to move, or people who use substances, we've got to move to neutral language that recognizes that what I put in my body is just an aspect of who I am. It's not who I am, right? That my human dignity is in no way diminished, by the substances that I choose to use. All right, so the other thing, and this is sort of my last dark comment, and then I'll stop, is one of the things that's been remarkable in my 25, 30-year career is that we actually have effective biomedical interventions for a lot of the problems that I've identified, right? We can prevent HIV. We can prevent hepatitis C. We have great medications for opiate use disorder, right? Buprenorphine in particular, I'm a fan of. But they're not getting to the populations that need them, right? So you have these structural conditions that drive people into immense desperation. And then you've got these biomedical interventions that we spend billions of dollars developing, but we don't have the social service system to actually make them available to the populations that need them. That's a real danger in the cannabis world as well, right? So even if we find that it works for X, Y, and Z ailments, the capacity to make it available to the people who need it most is not there. So we really do have to start dealing with the service environment and how care is provided. And the best way to do that is by putting the people who are at most risk for these problems at the center of the work. So let me just conclude with this. You know, let's look at low barrier access. Let's put patient choice back into the equation. I think that's so important. And again, is a thing that often gets lost, you know, with people who are using substances, or you'll take what we'll give you. Well, the market's responded, and they won't take what we'll give them, right? We have to engage them in that process. How do you want this medication? What is the environment where it's going to work for you best? What's the dosage that you need? It's no different than if I went to the doctor and I had a problem, I would have that conversation too. So why do I get that, but no, everyone else doesn't? Right? It just doesn't make any sense. Flexible study designs are going to be important, changing contacts, and then just finally, you know, we've got to change our politics. I mean, we have things that work. We're not getting into people. The reasons we're not getting into people don't make any sense. It would save us a ton of money if we did it. We just have to find the political will to make it happen. Thank you very much.